Hello, welcome back to Holy Histories. Today we're diving into one of the most incredible stories of faith, courage, and divine intervention, which is the story of the Israelites crossing the Red Sea. Whether you're familiar with this biblical account or hearing it for the first time, the lessons in this story are timeless and impactful. Imagine being trapped between an impossible obstacle and an advancing army, and then witnessing a miraculous escape. It's a moment of true deliverance and trust in God's power. So, if you're ready to explore how faith can guide us through our most difficult challenges and how this ancient story still speaks volumes to us today, make sure to stick around. And before we get started, don't forget to subscribe to Holy Histories and hit that notification bell so you can be the first to hear these incredible stories of faith, miracles, and divine intervention. Let's get started. The story of the Israelites crossing the Red Sea is one of the most iconic and dramatic events in the Bible, encapsulating themes of faith, divine intervention, and deliverance. It is recorded in the book of Exodus, primarily in Exodus chapter 14, and marks the beginning of the Israelites' escape from slavery in Egypt under the leadership of Moses. For over 400 years, the Israelites had lived in Egypt, originally as honored guests during Joseph's time, but eventually as slaves under the rule of a new Pharaoh who did not remember Joseph's contributions. Under the harsh conditions of slavery, the Israelites cried out to God for deliverance, and he raised up Moses to lead them out of bondage. After a series of 10 devastating plagues sent by God, which culminated in the death of the firstborn sons of Egypt during Passover, Pharaoh reluctantly agreed to let the Israelites go. The Israelites, numbering around 600,000 men, along with women, children, and livestock, quickly gathered their belongings and left Egypt. However, Pharaoh soon changed his mind and pursued them with a powerful army of chariots, intending to bring them back to slavery or destroy them. As the Israelites journeyed toward the Promised Land, God led them by a pillar of cloud during the day and a pillar of fire at night, guiding them through the wilderness. God instructed Moses to lead the people to camp by the Red Sea, where they were effectively trapped between the sea and the advancing Egyptian army. Upon seeing Pharaoh's army approaching, the Israelites were filled with fear and panic. They began to cry out to Moses, accusing him of leading them to their deaths in the wilderness, and questioning why they had left Egypt. Their fear and desperation overwhelmed them, and they momentarily lost faith in God's promise of deliverance. Moses, however, remained steadfast in his trust in God. He urged the people not to be afraid, saying in Exodus chapter 14, verses 13 to 14, "Do not be afraid. Stand firm, and you will see the deliverance the Lord will bring you today. The Egyptians you see today you will never see again. The Lord will fight for you. You need only to be still." At that moment, God instructed Moses to raise his staff and stretch his hand over the sea. As Moses obeyed, a miraculous event unfolded. God sent a strong east wind that blew all night, parting the waters of the Red Sea and creating a dry path through the middle of the sea with walls of water standing on either side. The Israelites began to cross the sea on dry ground, an extraordinary sight that demonstrated God's power and protection. All of the Israelites, men, women, children, and animals, safely made it to the other side. Pharaoh and his army, determined to recapture the Israelites, pursued them into the sea. However, as the Egyptian chariots moved through the path, God threw their army into confusion. He caused the wheels of the chariots to jam and slowed their progress. Once the Israelites had completely crossed the sea, God instructed Moses to stretch out his hand once again. As Moses did so, the waters of the Red Sea returned to their place, crashing down upon the Egyptian army. Every single one of Pharaoh's soldiers who had entered the sea was drowned, and the mighty Egyptian army was destroyed. Not one of the Egyptians survived, and the Israelites were finally free from their oppressors. This miraculous deliverance sealed the fate of Egypt and marked a significant turning point in the history of the Israelites. In the aftermath of the miraculous crossing, the Israelites were filled with awe and gratitude for God's deliverance. Moses and the Israelites sang a song of praise to the Lord, known as the Song of the Sea or the Song of Moses. It is one of the oldest songs in the Bible and reflects the Israelites' deep appreciation for God's power and faithfulness. Miriam, Moses' sister, also led the women in a song of praise, dancing with tambourines and celebrating their victory. The people rejoiced in their newfound freedom, acknowledging that it was only by God's hand that they had been saved from certain death. The story is indeed an impactful one that is filled with deep spiritual significance and themes both for the Israelites and for believers throughout history. The first theme is divine deliverance. The crossing of the Red Sea stands as one of the most dramatic examples of God's power and deliverance. The Israelites found themselves in an utterly hopeless situation, trapped between the vast Red Sea in front of them and Pharaoh's advancing army behind them. From a human perspective, there was no escape, but in that moment of fear and desperation, God demonstrated his ability to intervene in impossible situations. Through Moses, God parted the waters of the Red Sea, creating a path of dry ground for his people to cross to safety. This miraculous event not only rescued the Israelites, but also destroyed their enemies as the waters returned and swallowed Pharaoh's army. This act of deliverance wasn't just about saving the Israelites from physical danger. It was a reaffirmation of God's covenant and a visible reminder that he is a protector, a provider, and a guide. The Israelites were powerless on their own, but through faith and obedience, they witnessed the incredible lengths God would go to in order to save his people. This story describes the truth that God can make a way where there seems to be no way. Whether we are facing seemingly insurmountable obstacles in life, be it financial struggles, health challenges, broken relationships, or spiritual battles, God is capable of delivering us. The Red Sea crossing is a reminder to trust in God's timing and power, even when we can't see a way out, because nothing is beyond his reach. The second key theme is faith in the midst of fear. Faith in the midst of fear. When the Israelites found themselves trapped between the Red Sea and Pharaoh's rapidly advancing army, fear gripped them. It seemed as though their newfound freedom from Egypt would be short-lived, and the likelihood of survival appeared slim. Their fear was understandable after all. They were up against the mighty Egyptian army with no visible escape route. In that moment of panic, many of them questioned Moses and doubted whether God had truly led them to safety. But then, Moses stepped forward with a remarkable display of faith. Despite the terrifying circumstances, Moses did not waver. He declared to the Israelites, "Do not be afraid. Stand firm, and you will see the deliverance the Lord will bring you today." Moses trusted in God's promises and believed that even in the face of apparent disaster, God would come through. This faith was not based on what Moses could see, but on his knowledge of God's character and faithfulness. Moses' faith in the midst of fear became a beacon of hope for the Israelites. Though they were consumed by fear, Moses' example encouraged them to stand firm and trust in God's plan. And that trust was rewarded when God miraculously parted the Red Sea, providing a path of deliverance that no one could have foreseen. This story teaches us that faith often requires us to trust in God's plans when everything around us seems hopeless. Like the Israelites, we may find ourselves facing situations that evoke fear, whether it's financial uncertainty, health crises, broken relationships, or career challenges. In those moments, fear can easily overwhelm us, leading us to doubt or question God's presence and purpose. This story reminds us that faith doesn't mean the absence of fear. It means trusting God despite our fear. Faith calls us to hold on to God's promises even when our circumstances are challenging. Moses' unwavering trust in God's power teaches us that when we stand firm in faith, we can witness God's deliverance in unexpected ways. The third theme is God's power and authority. The event itself was a display of divine control over the natural world, proving that nothing is beyond God's ability. In this moment, God did what no human could. He made a path through an impassable sea, reinforcing his sovereignty over both the forces of nature and the affairs of mankind. Pharaoh's army, with its horses, chariots, and military strength, was the most powerful force in the known world at that time. The Israelites, by contrast, were a vulnerable group of former slaves, unarmed and defenseless. Humanly speaking, their situation seemed hopeless. But where human power and wisdom failed, God's power transcended all limitations. With a single command, he turned a barrier into a passageway. The waters of the Red Sea, which should have been a death trap, were parted, creating walls of water on either side and allowing the Israelites to walk through on dry land. This miracle not only delivered the Israelites from immediate danger, but also served as a dramatic testament to God's authority. It was a clear message that God is in control of everything, whether it be the natural world or human circumstances. He holds the power to manipulate the elements, and nothing in creation is outside his command. This demonstration of power wasn't just about saving the Israelites, it was about showing that God is sovereign over all creation, including the most seemingly impossible situations. For us today, the parting of the Red Sea serves as a reminder that there is no obstacle too great for God to overcome. We may face challenges that appear insurmountable, but this story reminds us that God's power transcends human understanding and limitations. When we rely on his strength and submit to his authority, he can make a way where there seems to be no way. The final theme is judgment and justice. Pharaoh's persistent rebellion against God and his refusal to heed repeated warnings culminated in a devastating consequence: the destruction of his army in the same waters that provided salvation for the Israelites. This dual outcome of salvation and judgment reflects a key principle of God's character. He is both merciful and just. Pharaoh had been given numerous opportunities to obey God's command to let the Israelites go, but he continuously hardened his heart. Despite witnessing multiple miracles and plagues that demonstrated God's authority, Pharaoh remained defiant, stubbornly refusing to submit. His final act of rebellion, chasing after the Israelites, even after letting them leave, sealed his fate. God had shown patience, but when Pharaoh chose to pursue his own will instead of humbling himself before God, judgment became inevitable. As Pharaoh's army charged into the parted sea, their arrogance and defiance were on full display. They followed the same path the Israelites took, perhaps believing that they could escape judgment. But once the Israelites were safely on the other side, God allowed the waters to return, engulfing Pharaoh's chariots and soldiers, and putting an end to the pursuit. What had been a path of deliverance for God's people became a graveyard for those who opposed him. This serves as a sobering reminder of the consequences of defying God's will. God is patient and offers chances for repentance, but there comes a point where continuous rebellion leads to judgment. Pharaoh's downfall illustrates that no amount of human power or stubbornness can prevail against God's authority. His justice is certain, and while he extends mercy to those who seek it, he also brings judgment to those who persist in defiance. For us today, the story highlights the importance of aligning ourselves with God's will. Ignoring God's warnings and pursuing selfish desires in opposition to his commands will ultimately result in judgment. It is a call to submit to God's authority, recognizing that while he is patient, his justice is sure. The story of the Israelites crossing the Red Sea continues to hold valuable lessons for people today. The story of the Israelites crossing the Red Sea provides a profound lesson in trusting God's timing, especially in moments of overwhelming fear and uncertainty. When the Israelites found themselves trapped between the Red Sea and Pharaoh's advancing army, their situation seemed hopeless. They had just escaped slavery only to face what appeared to be imminent destruction. In that moment, panic set in, and they questioned both Moses and God, wondering why they had been led into such a dire predicament. Yet, it was precisely in this moment of crisis that God revealed his power and timing in the most miraculous way. Instead of rushing into action immediately, God allowed the situation to intensify. The Red Sea didn't part the moment the Israelites arrived at its shores, and Pharaoh's army continued to close in. From a human perspective, it looked as though God's help might arrive too late, if at all. But when God finally acted, it was at the perfect moment. With the Egyptian army bearing down on them, God instructed Moses to stretch out his staff, and the waters of the Red Sea miraculously parted, allowing the Israelites to walk through on dry ground. Once they were safely across, God closed the waters over the Egyptians, destroying Pharaoh's army and securing the Israelites' freedom. This timing wasn't coincidental, it was a demonstration of God's sovereignty, showing that he knows exactly when to intervene. If the sea had parted earlier, the Israelites might not have fully realized the magnitude of their deliverance, or perhaps they would have been overtaken by the Egyptians in another way. By waiting until the last possible moment, God not only displayed his power but also deepened the Israelites' trust in him. They were reminded that even when it feels like everything is closing in and there's no way out, God is still in control and capable of delivering them in ways they couldn't have imagined. For people today, this story holds a critical lesson. We often find ourselves in situations where we feel trapped, overwhelmed, or uncertain about the future. Whether it's a personal challenge, a difficult relationship, or an overwhelming obstacle, it's easy to feel abandoned or question God's presence when answers don't come immediately. However, the crossing of the Red Sea reminds us that God's timing is always perfect, even when it feels delayed. God often works in ways that we cannot see or predict, and his provision may not come in the way or at the moment we expect. But when it does come, it will be exactly what we need, at exactly the right time. Trusting in God's timing requires patience and faith, especially in moments of waiting or fear. It means believing that, like the Israelites, God will make a way even when it seems impossible. This trust allows us to relinquish control, knowing that God is always working behind the scenes to bring about deliverance in his perfect way and time. The Israelites' experience at the Red Sea teaches us that God's timing is not our own, but it is always perfect. In moments when we feel trapped or overwhelmed, we can find comfort in knowing that God is working even when we cannot see it. This story encourages us to trust in his timing and provision, holding on to faith that he will make a way even when the situation seems impossible. Instead of succumbing to fear, we are called to stand firm and believe that God's deliverance is on the way in his perfect time. The second lesson is God's ability to deliver. As the Israelites stood trapped between Pharaoh's mighty army and the vast expanse of the Red Sea, there appeared to be no escape. Their fear and desperation were understandable, as their human perspective could only see defeat and destruction. However, what they didn't realize at that moment was that their impossible situation was an opportunity for God to showcase his boundless power and deliver them in a miraculous way. God's ability to deliver is not limited by human logic or natural circumstances. To the Israelites, their situation was hopeless. There was no way they could fight Pharaoh's well-equipped army, and the sea itself posed an insurmountable obstacle. Yet God's power transcends the limits of nature and human understanding. In this instance, he commanded Moses to stretch out his staff, and in response, the waters of the Red Sea parted, creating a dry path for the Israelites to walk through to safety. What seemed impossible by human standards became entirely possible through God's intervention. This divine deliverance wasn't just about physical escape, it also symbolized God's total sovereignty and his deep care for his people. He didn't lead them out of slavery only to abandon them at the first sign of trouble. Instead, He demonstrated that no matter how desperate or dire the situation appeared, he was fully capable of providing a way out. Even when the Israelites couldn't see a solution, God already had a plan in place, one that would both protect them and demonstrate his power and glory. In our world today, the Red Sea crossing serves as an indicator to us that no matter how impossible our circumstances may seem, God is able to deliver us. This can apply to physical danger, as the Israelites experienced, but it also extends to emotional, mental, and spiritual struggles. Whether we are facing financial difficulties, relationship challenges, overwhelming anxiety, or spiritual battles, the same God who parted the Red Sea is still capable of delivering us from whatever obstacles we face. Sometimes we may find ourselves in situations where the way forward seems blocked, much like the Israelites. We may feel hemmed in by our problems with no clear path to safety. In these moments, it can be tempting to give in to fear or despair, just as the Israelites initially did. However, the Red Sea story encourages us to hold on to faith, trusting that God can make a way where there seems to be no way. His deliverance may not come in the way we expect or on our timeline, but his power is never limited by the size of our problems. In addition to physical and emotional deliverance, this story also speaks to God's ability to deliver us from spiritual battles. Just as the Israelites were freed from slavery in Egypt, we can be delivered from spiritual bondage, whether that be sin, addiction, or any other force that seeks to hold us captive. God's power to save is as real today as it was when he parted the Red Sea. Through faith in him, we can experience deliverance in every area of our lives. The third powerful lesson from the story of the Israelites crossing the Red Sea is the importance of choosing faith over fear in times of crisis. When the Israelites saw Pharaoh's army approaching, they were overcome with fear. This fear was understandable, considering they were former slaves with no military experience, facing one of the most powerful armies in the world. The Red Sea blocked their escape, and the situation appeared hopeless. In their panic, they cried out, questioning why Moses had led them out of Egypt only to die in the desert. Fear had taken hold of them, and they could not see beyond the immediate danger. Moses' faith in God's promise of deliverance helped shift the focus from the seemingly impossible circumstances to God's power and faithfulness. He encouraged the Israelites to trust in God's plan, even though they couldn't see the outcome. This moment highlights the pivotal choice we face in challenging situations: to allow fear to dominate or to stand firm in faith. Faith over fear is a recurring theme throughout the Bible and life itself. When fear grips us, it often clouds our judgment, leading to doubt, rash decisions, or inaction. The Israelites, in their fear, were ready to give up and return to slavery rather than face the uncertainty of what lay ahead. Their fear magnified the problem, making it seem as though there was no hope. This reaction reflects how fear can paralyze us in our own lives, preventing us from trusting in God's promises or moving forward in faith. Moses' response, however, shows the power of faith to overcome fear. His trust in God's ability to deliver them not only gave him courage, but also calmed the people and prepared them for the miracle that was about to happen. Faith, in this context, is not just wishful thinking. It is confidence in God's character, his promises, and his ability to intervene. Moses knew that God had led them to that point for a reason, and he trusted that God would make a way, even if the path wasn't yet visible. For us today, the lesson of faith over fear is particularly relevant. In moments of crisis, whether they are personal, financial, relational, or spiritual, fear often becomes the dominant emotion. We may feel trapped, uncertain of how to move forward, just as the Israelites felt with the Red Sea in front of them and Pharaoh's army behind. It's easy to focus on the magnitude of the problem and forget that God is bigger than any obstacle we face. Choosing faith over fear means believing that even when we can't see the way out, God is working behind the scenes. It means trusting that God has a plan for our deliverance, even when circumstances appear insurmountable. Faith gives us the strength to stand firm, to wait on God's timing, and to keep moving forward, even in uncertainty. It does not mean ignoring the reality of the situation or pretending that fear doesn't exist, but it means that faith takes precedence. Faith informs our actions and reactions, reminding us that God is with us in the midst of the storm. The story of the Red Sea crossing illustrates that fear, when unchecked, can distort our perception of reality. The Israelites, in their panic, were ready to return to the very bondage from which they had been delivered, simply because it felt safer than the unknown. This shows how fear can cause us to settle for less than God's best for our lives, clinging to familiar struggles instead of stepping into the freedom He offers. Faith, on the other hand, invites us to trust in God's greater plan, even when it requires stepping into the unknown. In moments of crisis, it is easy to allow fear to dictate our actions, just as the Israelites did when faced with Pharaoh's army. However, Moses' faith in God's deliverance reminds us to stand firm and trust in God's promises, even when circumstances seem impossible. This teaches us the importance of maintaining faith over fear, knowing that God is greater than any challenge we face. Faith gives us the courage to move forward, trusting that God will provide a way through even the most daunting obstacles. The final but deeply significant lesson from the story of the Israelites crossing the Red Sea is the demonstration of God's justice. Throughout the narrative, we see the stark contrast between the oppressors and the oppressed, and how God intervenes to bring about justice. While the Israelites endured years of slavery and mistreatment at the hands of the Egyptians, the story of their deliverance from Pharaoh's army shows that God sees the oppression and injustice in the world and will act in His time to bring about righteousness. Pharaoh had hardened his heart against God repeatedly, ignoring the plagues that devastated Egypt and refusing to release the Israelites. His defiance represented not just stubbornness, but an active resistance to God's will. He believed in his own power and authority, thinking he could continue to oppress God's people without consequence. However, God's justice is never delayed or compromised. Even when it seems like wrongdoers are getting away with their actions, God is fully aware and will act according to His divine plan. As the Egyptians pursued the Israelites to the edge of the Red Sea, it seemed as though the Israelites were trapped. Pharaoh's army was closing in, and to the human eye, the situation appeared hopeless. But God, in His perfect timing, parted the Red Sea, allowing the Israelites to cross on dry ground. As the Egyptians followed, the waters that had been a path to freedom for the Israelites became an instrument of judgment for the Egyptians. Pharaoh's army was swallowed by the sea, and their oppression came to a definitive end. This dramatic act of justice serves as a reminder that God sees all forms of injustice, and even when we cannot see immediate consequences for wrong actions, He will act in His time to right the wrongs. God's justice may not always align with human timelines, but it is certain. Throughout the Bible, God's justice is portrayed as both protective and punitive. He protects and delivers those who are oppressed, while punishing those who persist in defying His will and harming others. The Red Sea story also highlights that God's justice is fair and righteous. Pharaoh had been given multiple opportunities to let the Israelites go, to listen to Moses, and to heed God's warnings, but he repeatedly chose to harden his heart. His pursuit of the Israelites, even after allowing them to leave, demonstrates his unwillingness to accept God's authority. The destruction of his army was not just an arbitrary act of violence. It was the culmination of his persistent rebellion against God's will and his continued oppression of God's people. This teaches us that when people choose to persist in wrongdoing, especially after being warned and given opportunities to repent, there will eventually be consequences. For our generation, this story serves as a powerful reminder that injustice will not go unchecked forever. In a world where injustice can often seem rampant, where oppression and wrongdoing appear to go unpunished, the story of the Red Sea assures us that God is fully aware of what is happening. Whether on a personal level, a societal level, or a global level, God sees every act of oppression and wrong, and He will bring about justice. We may not always witness this justice immediately, but we can trust that God's timing is perfect. His judgment is not hasty or arbitrary, but it comes at the right moment in accordance with His wisdom. In moments where we feel the weight of injustice, whether we're experiencing it ourselves or witnessing it in the world, this story encourages us to trust in God's justice. We are called to remember that God is a God of righteousness and He will act. This knowledge can give us peace and hope, even when situations seem hopeless. Just as God delivered the Israelites from the hands of their oppressors, He will deliver and bring justice to all situations in His own time. Also, God's justice also extends to how we live our lives. It is a reminder that our actions have consequences, and we are called to align ourselves with God's ways. Pharaoh's fate serves as a warning to those who would persist in wrongdoing and defiance of God's commands. But for those who walk in righteousness and seek God's will, His justice is a source of comfort and protection. God's justice not only punishes wrongdoers, but also vindicates the righteous. While we may not always see immediate justice in our circumstances, the story of the Red Sea crossing assures us that God is a God of justice. He sees the oppression, wrongdoing, and injustice in the world, and in His perfect timing, He will act to bring about righteousness. This serves as a reminder to trust in God's justice, knowing that no wrong deed goes unnoticed and that His judgment will come when the time is right. This encourages us to live in alignment with His will and trust that His justice will prevail, even when it seems delayed. In conclusion, the crossing of the Red Sea stands as one of the most monumental events in biblical history, vividly illustrating the profound themes of God's incredible power, unwavering faithfulness, and His unmatched ability to deliver His people from seemingly insurmountable challenges. This miraculous moment goes beyond time, resonating deeply within the hearts of believers today, and serves as an enduring reminder of the pivotal role faith and trust play in the journey of faith. The event serves as a profound illustration of God's faithfulness to His promises. From the moment He chose Abraham to be the father of many nations, God had a plan for His people. The deliverance at the Red Sea was not just about freeing the Israelites from slavery, it was a fulfillment of God's covenant promises to them. His faithfulness is a reminder that He keeps His word and that we can rely on Him even when circumstances seem to suggest otherwise. This aspect of the narrative encourages us to hold fast to our faith, trusting that God will fulfill His promises in our lives, no matter how long it may take or how impossible the situation may seem. As we reflect on this powerful story, we are reminded of the ongoing relevance of the lessons it teaches. Each of us may encounter our own Red Sea moments, which are situations that seem impossible to navigate or overcome. Whether facing personal struggles, health crises, financial burdens, or relational difficulties, the crossing of the Red Sea assures us that God is a deliverer who specializes in making a way when there appears to be none. It invites us to cultivate an unwavering faith, trusting that God will guide us through our challenges. The crossing of the Red Sea is more than just an ancient story. It is a timeless testament to the nature of God as a powerful, faithful, and compassionate deliverer. It encourages us to keep faith in the face of fear, to trust in His promises, and to remain confident that divine intervention is possible in our lives. As we navigate the complexities of life, let us carry this truth in our hearts. No matter the obstacles we face, we serve a God who is always ready to lead us through to safety and deliverance, reaffirming our faith in His goodness and grace. This powerful narrative continues to inspire believers to stand firm in their faith, assured that God is actively involved in their lives and that He will guide them through every challenge they encounter. Wow, what an incredible journey the Israelites went through as they crossed the Red Sea. This story is such a powerful reminder that no matter how trapped or overwhelmed we may feel, God is always capable of making a way. From the faith of Moses to the divine intervention that changed history, we can draw so many lessons on trust, perseverance, and God's justice. If this story resonated with you or brought any new insights, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. What stood out to you the most? And remember, if you enjoyed today's video, give it a thumbs up and share it with someone who might need a reminder that faith can move mountains or part seas. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you'll be the first to know when we share more inspiring stories. Until next time, stay faithful, stay encouraged, and remember, God is always with you, even in your Red Sea moments. See you in the next video.